Hi, everyone. Welcome to our NICU Parent Perspectives panel, where we'll dive into the unique experiences of adoptive and foster parents navigating the NICU journey. I'm Tanisha Stamps, virtual program manager here at Handle Hold and a NICU parent myself. We're honored to have such an incredible group of panelists to share their stories today. But before we dive into our discussion, I'd like to share a brief introduction to Handle Hold. Hand to Hold was founded in 2011 in Austin, Texas by Kelly Kelly, a NICU parent who envisioned a world where no NICU family would ever feel alone. What started as a bold idea has now grown into a #1 NICU nonprofit exclusively dedicated to NICU parent support. In 2024 alone, Hand to Hold served families across the country, providing vital peer support, counseling, resources, and community for families facing the NICU experience. With two of the five largest birth markets in the U.S. within 200 miles of our office, we understand the profound need for NICU support. Through virtual and in-person programs, we strive to ensure every NICU family, regardless of where they are, has access to the compassionate support they need. Research shows just how important peer support is for NICU parents, especially for adoptive and foster parents. These parents often face unique challenges like legal hurdles, limited access to prenatal history, and the emotional journey of bonding with a baby who may have been born prematurely or with medical needs. We also know that many infants entering foster care have experienced prenatal substance exposure or adverse birth outcomes like prematurity and low birth weight, which often lead to a NICU stay. Having strong social and emotional support makes a huge difference for foster parents, and research suggests that peer support is one of the best ways to provide that support. NICU parents consistently say that connecting with other parents helps them feel less alone, builds community, and offers practical advice, things that make coping during and after a NICU stay a little easier. At Hand to Hold, we believe that when we support parents, we're also supporting their babies. That's why conversations like this matter. By sharing experiences and learning from one another, we can create stronger and more compassionate community for all NICU families. And now to introduce our parents. First, we're going to start with Christy. Christy is a mother of two. Her son, Kevin, spent 2.5 months in the NICU, an experience that gave Christy and her husband a deep appreciation for the importance of strong NICU support. As a full-time working parent, Christy understands the challenges of balancing time between the NICU and work. So thank you for being here, Christy.
Thank you for having me.
And next we have Myra. So Myra is the mom to 4 children, where 2 of her children spent time in the NICU. Her second oldest daughter, Ava, was born intrauterine growth restricted at under 2 pounds at 32 weeks old. She spent 40 days in the NICU and was discharged under 4 pounds. Her second youngest, Mina, was born at 33 weeks and 6 days and spent a week in the NICU. Thank you for being here, Myra.
Thank you for having me.
And finally, but not last, of course, we have Morgan. Morgan is the mother to 3 children. Her youngest, Franklin, spent 30 days in the NICU undergoing morphine withdrawal due to in utero exposure before being discharged to Morgan's family as a foster placement. During his NICU stay, he required oxygen support and a feeding tube. After discharge, he faced ongoing challenges, including tremors, feeding and weight gain difficulties, low muscle tone, and clasped thumbs. Morgan's family is currently exploring a potential cerebral palsy diagnosis for him. Morgan and her family have maintained a strong relationship with Franklin's NICU team, keeping them updated on his progress and their adoption journey. One of his primary nurses with 25 years of experience has shared that she had never seen a baby struggle as much as Franklin. Despite these challenges, he continues to defy the odds, a true fighter and a little miracle. So thanks for being here, Morgan.
Thanks for having me.
So now we're going to get into our discussion. So we'll start with Christy. Can you share a little bit about your journey to become an adoptive and foster parent and how it intersected with the NICU?
Absolutely. So my husband and I knew that we wanted to be parents, and like anyone else, you start trying. And then when we tried for so long and realized this wasn't happening, we went through a lot of tests to figure out what the complications might be, either with him or me. And then we went through a lot of tests after that and led us to the probability that it wasn't going to happen. They didn't really give us a definitive why, and I just didn't want to try other outlets. And we decided that adoption was more of a guarantee for us to get a baby. And so we felt more called to that. It was in our family, and we were comfortable with it. And we decided we're going to adopt a baby. Um, we went and looked for a bunch of agencies and finally fell in love with our agency. That was an open adoption agency that stays in contact with the bio parents. And we started that process, and we knew that we were lower on the list, but when a case opened up for our particular son who had a lot of complications, that pushed us higher up on the list, and we kind of had to weigh, were we ready for this? And we were like, yes. And when the biological mom fell in love with us and we took on our case and met our son in the NICU, we just fell in love with him. So we felt that our son needed love from parents, and we were ready to adopt him. We knew the challenges. We were prepared for that, or at least as well as we could once we got to the NICU. So that's how we moved up to adoption and ended up with a case with a NICU baby.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Christy. What about you, Myra?
So similar to Christy, we went through an adoption agency. We always knew that we were going to adopt children, and we adopted our first child as a newborn. Actually, that birth mom found us on Facebook, which is interesting. For our once Jalen was about 6 months old, we decided we were going to add to our family, and so we went through the process again with another agency, and were matched with Ava's birth mom when she was 31 weeks pregnant. So we knew that it was a high risk pregnancy. She had preeclampsia. We did not know that 1 week later we would be traveling to Virginia, where she was born, and basically be living in the NICU for the next 40 days. And then with Mina, we had a similar story. We went through a private agency and were matched with her again during the pregnancy, and did not know that she was as high risk as she was, and ended up, of course, in the NICU in Florida that time. So it was quite different journeys. And our fourth child was also adopted again through a private agency. So they're all very different stories. But Ava's NICU day was our first experience with the NICU.
Thank you for sharing. And Morgan.
So we have our three kiddos. Our oldest is biological, and we had to do fertility treatments to have him. And then we knew we wanted to adopt, so we kind of looked into domestic and presented ourselves, as many people do, to like 50 some birth mamas, and never were chosen. And then through lots of doors opening, we decided to pursue foster care. We had the space in our home. We were like, why not? We had one foster placement, and then our daughter, who was actually shown in the photo, she also spent time in the NICU, but not while she was in our care. She was also in the NICU for 30 days when she was born, and she came to us, though, from a different foster home when she was 2. And she also has a lot of ongoing medical needs related to substance exposure in utero, and she has fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, autism. And then our little guy we brought home from the NICU, much different experience than bringing home a toddler, with a lot of similar issues, but and struggles. But we brought him home from the NICU. He was there as well for a month. We did not get to go be there with him until the final couple of days. But like Tanisha said in my little bio, we have kept up with his NICU team. They were some of the first people we emailed on adoption day, photos of him. And so we have a really great relationship with them. So yeah.
Thank you all for sharing very different experiences. That's what we love here. So in the next question, which Morgan kind of touched on this a little bit, but just how did being a foster and adoptive parent impact your bonding process with your baby, particularly Myra, you touched on having to go to another state. So I will start with you there.
Yeah, it was actually really difficult with Ava. She was in the NICU for 2 whole days, which doesn't seem a lot, but like it feels like a lot in retrospect, without us being there. So her birth mom had an emergency C-section and was kind of like right out of commission for 48 hours or so. And they told us, do not go travel to Florida, to Virginia. We were in Chicago. And they said, do not travel there until you confirm, like, if she's going to go for the adoption. And so we waited. And finally, she was like, of course, like, why aren't you here? And then when we got to Virginia, it was hard because Ava had been by herself, right? Like, no one was in the NICU with her. It's a NICU that has like little rooms for them, which was great for us as adoptive parents, but from like, I don't know, wanting to be there for your child, it's hard because you're alone. And so the hospital was super welcoming to us, like from the minute that we got there, they made sure that the birth mom signed the papers that she needed so that we could make decisions for her. It just was hard to not be there. And she was so little, and I felt like she needed us. So after having gone through like those 2 days not being there, we basically like uprooted the family and essentially lived basically in the NICU. So our son at the time was 16 weeks old. So my husband brought my son the next day. My mom came down, and luckily we had jobs where we could basically work in the NICU on our computers. And so it was good to be there. We couldn't hold her they would let us hold her like as they were weighing her. And so the nurses were great about making sure to involve us because we couldn't take her out. She had forced air, she had, all kinds of lines in her. And so that was really hard.
Thank you so much, Matter, for sharing. Christy.
So I guess my biggest challenge was that wanting to connect to my son from day one. That was one of the reasons the biological mom picked my husband and I was we had no prior kids. And so she wanted us to be able to spend every waking moment we could in the NICU. So our second adoption, she probably would have picked us if we had a kid, but with my son, she knew we needed to be there. And it was important to me to like get him to hear my voice and know who I was because I knew I didn't carry him in my womb, so he didn't know my voice, he didn't know the way I smelled or my touch or any of that. So I quickly struggled with that, wanting to connect with him. I know day one they would not let me hold him because they weren't sure who was like who's supposed to be here, who are you? They were a little bit like confused. I know they weren't prepared for an adoption at that time on who we were, and I wish they would have had notes so they would have been like, oh yes, and welcomed us like you said they did for you. But day one they were like leery of who we were, and even though we came in with our social worker and our agency person representative, and I just quickly wanted to bond with my son as soon as I could. So that was a struggle for me to just want to be there instantly.
Thanks for sharing. And what about you, Morgan?
Yeah, I would say similar to what they were saying. Obviously, I have one bio kiddo, so getting that experience of delivery and holding my son immediately, I know what that experience was like. And then especially for Franklin, he spent a month alone in the NICU, which has definitely impacted him long term. He's hyper attached to me. And my daughter, I would say, she was in the NICU as well for 30 days alone, and then unfortunately went to a very abusive foster home after that for 2 years. And so I think a lot of those early stages of lack of attachment, even though her NICU team was the same as his, they were incredible. They held the babies as much as they could. They clearly loved my son. I mean, they hang his photo up in their staff lounge still. But it's not a parent relationship. And so I do think it's had lasting effects on both of my kids that we didn't get that from day one. Which is unfortunate, but we're like trying to make up for it. He's my koala baby still. So, um, yeah.
Yeah, I love how all of you just touched on the desire and need and want really to be there for your kid from day one, and how, the complexity of all the situations that you've shared. So I appreciate that. Kind of moving into some communication. So just thinking about your NICU team, like how did the hospital staff communicate with you about your role and rights as parents? Were there moments where you particularly felt like really supported and or left out of important decisions? I'll start with you, Morgan.
Yeah, like I've said a couple times, like our NICU team was phenomenal with him. They clearly loved and adored him. They all fought over holding him because he was there alone and didn't have anyone from delivery till we got there at 31 days. Um, from the moment we walked in the NICU, they were like cheering for us, cheered us out of there. I mean, just above and beyond. Never once did we feel like we were a foster parent. Felt like his mom from day one, which I think made a huge impact. I mean, we had never picked a baby up from the NICU. Our other two kiddos that we had as foster placements, and then our daughter who we adopted were toddlers. And so this was a totally new experience for us, having to check into the hospital, try to figure out where I'm going, get a badge to get into the NICU. We've never had that experience, and I'm really thankful it was a super positive one. It gave us confidence leaving the hospital that they told us everything, sat down with us, what had happened the first 30 days, which they didn't really need to do that, but they chose to take the time to go through all of his medical needs and history up to that point. In foster care, a lot of times you don't get that. And so I'm really thankful that we happened to get that.
Thank you for sharing. What about you, Christy?
So early on, I don't think we got support right away because I think they were still trying to navigate, do we go to the biological mom or do we go to the adoptive mom? So there were some missed calls at first. Thankfully, our biological mom redirected everything to me. Like she goes, I got a call. Can he get this? And she's like, I don't want to do this. She would redirect it to me and advise them. Thankfully, she was okay. And where she was to direct it to me. So we had a few of those missed cases. Even Hand to Hold called her, not me. And so she's like, I don't want anything with Hand to Hold. She was very like distancing herself, and they kept calling her. And she's like, if you want to do this, you can go ahead and get the support, but it's not for me. And she's like, I don't want any part of that. So there was some lack of support in like going to her first on our side, but once they figured out who we were, like a couple of weeks later, the phone calls were more supportive, directed to me. The nurses were calling me, the doctors were calling me, and my husband and I, so we could make the decisions on stuff. Um, so I feel like that's where they missed out, where with adoption it can be a tricky, you're trying to navigate how comfortable they are with relinquishing rights and then us taking rights. It could have played a very tricky part in whether her decision to finally relinquish rights and sign papers over. It could have been a very tricky situation, but luckily our biological mom was very supportive and directed it back to us.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. What about you, Myra?
Yeah, so we had two very different experiences with Ava right away, right? And I think it was that 2 day. Once we got there, all fine so that we could make medical decisions. And so they kept us in the loop and were very accommodating as far as like us being in the room, staying the night and all of that stuff. And the birth mom essentially discharged, I think, right as we got there because she had been there already for the 48 hours. With Mina, it was interesting because she was born in Florida in the NICU when it have the baby, like so there was, and I went there by myself at that time. Two children that were in Chicago, and for the first, I think it was 24 hours, she did not want to. I don't know if she didn't want to, but they didn't have the birth mom sign any paperwork that would give me rights to make any decisions. And some decisions had to be made, right, about her medical treatment. And they went to the birth mom, and the birth mom would make those decisions. And essentially, one that sticks out is to whether to give her breast milk. Right? And she was eligible for it because she was in the NICU. And she was like, well, you're not going to give that to her when she's discharged. So she made the decision to give her formula with no consultation. So it was hard, right? Because Obviously, I was in a position waiting for her birth mom to relinquish rights. It was a very interesting. It started as a closed adoption, and now 5 years later, it's kind of semi-open. But the birth mom didn't want to meet me, so it was a little. It was hard, and some decisions were made that I wouldn't have made. The hospital was pretty accommodating because all issues. So I think that they were, it was a positive in their mind that, oh, she's being adopted, but they were bound to follow the decisions that were being made by the birth mom, and so her rights were relinquished in Florida very, very fast to relinquish rights, so it was a very short time period, and it was difficult.
Thank you for sharing. So Christy, the NICU is already pretty emotional. It's emotional roller coaster, but then you add in, adopting a baby, possibly fostering a baby. What are some of like the myths or misconceptions people have of this process as an adoptive or foster parent?
Maybe that because we're not dealing with birthing the child, that we're a little bit more prepared for this. And while we are prepared for some of the things that this child is going to come with, we're only told on paper and percentages and numbers, and we don't know what to expect. So I don't think, um, maybe they think that we can handle this a little bit better because we're not dealing with health issues of the birth and the pregnancy simultaneously. But that's still, there's so much emotion in adoption that it carries extra different emotional issues at that time.
Yeah, good point. Thank you for sharing. What about you, Morgan?
Yeah, I would 100% agree. I have never been so tired with my little guy as I was. I had a bio baby. I had a really hard, awful delivery, and I'm 1 million times more tired parenting him than I am my first. I think the exposures in utero play a big impact long term. I mean, he's 15 months now, and he has never once really slept like a good chunk through the night. I mean, we had a couple days this week, but not consistent. This is like the first day for this panel. He decided to take a nap for me, not on me. It's just a completely different experience as he has different challenges that are longer term than maybe a typical birth would. He has obviously the trauma aspect. He was in foster care, so it was a little different. We didn't have to do visitation with the biological parents. They filed for abandonment when he was 90 days old. They never did a visit, but we did have to do kinship visitation for him. So he's had a lot of trauma. So it's just a much different situation that doesn't end necessarily at the NICU. There was a lot that happened in the NICU, obviously, of him being alone, that played into that, but it definitely is a longer term battle for him for a lot of things.
Yeah, really good points. The babies do remember everything, even though people say they don't. They remember lots of things. So I appreciate that insight. And Myra, what about you?
Oh, sorry, what's the question again?
No worries. What are some just myths or misconceptions people have about adoptive and foster parents, but they're particularly like with adopting or fostering a NICU baby?
Um, I don't know. I mean, I guess people perceive it like it's some marked difference, right? Like you're an adoptive parent, you're not the biological parent. I think it's just as taxing, right? So maybe more so, just as emotional, potentially more so. I think both of my girls had issues because of in utero exposure, in utero nutrition, even. And so I think maybe the myth is people think it's easier or different in some way that would make it easier. And I think it's potentially more difficult, right? I've never been biological mom with a child in the NICU, but I think it's a whole additional layer of your child is in the NICU. You're dealing with all the emotion and stress of that. And then on top of that, you're dealing with all of the adoption aspects, right? Relinquishment, relationships with biological parents and families who are interested in what's happening with the child. And it's just a lot to manage. Of a misconception about.
Yeah, that's also a very good point. Um, So, speaking of like the emotional toll it takes and all of the things that you have to deal with, what kind of support, whether it be from the NICU staff, I know we've touched on the NICU staff a little bit, but just what kind of support did you get from the NICU staff, your family, community, resources that was like most helpful during this time and continues to still be? Because I know, Morgan, I'll start with you. You are still dealing with this journey and kind of like completed the journey by adopting your son recently, but like what kind of support did you get during this time?
Yeah, like I said, we have kept up with his NICU team. We actually did like a pajama drive for them. Like around Christmas time because when I was there, just realizing how many other babies were left alone, specifically in the county that he was born in, is a huge problem right now. And so we wanted babies to go home and clean fresh jammies. And so we kept up with his NICU team. We took them huge tote bag of jammies for his birthday, which was really sweet for them to see him and just they said like we don't get to see how kids progress. Like they leave here and we're like, what happened to some of these babies, especially the ones entering care that don't maybe have an adoptive or a foster parent that is super excited to come pick them up and meet them. And so that was really cool. So they have been an awesome support to us. Like I said, we emailed them adoption day photos like right away on Monday after we finalized. And then we have a really good family support. Could not do this, especially without my mom. He is still getting like at least 3 appointments a week. And if I did not have her, it would be really hard with my other kiddos, just juggling all of that. Now that they're in school, it's a little bit easier, but especially over the summer when they were not, that was really hard because my daughter, as I said, also has very high needs. She has autism and FASD and also NAS, which is neonatal absence syndrome. So she has a lot of her own things that we're working through. So if we didn't have family support or community support, it would definitely be really challenging because they're, like I said, their issues don't end in the NICU. It's ongoing.
Absolutely. And the appointments. People don't, the appointments do take a toll for sure. What about you, Christy?
Well, during the stay, we quickly got involved with Hand to Hold. My husband and I are kind of antisocial, so we didn't want to attend all the lunches or go to things, but we quickly realized we needed support because this was something we were first-time parents and we didn't know what NICU was. And so we got real involved with them and we went and attended one of the lunches and met a few of the moms that were in the NICU with us. And I think that was one of the breakthroughs that I had was those moms kind of accepted me as an adoptive mom. I was carrying this burden like because I didn't birth the child. I was feeling really guilty for not being healing like they were. So they just quickly welcomed me and were like, "You're here though, and you're with us and you're fighting this fight." So the hand to hold lunches really helped my husband and I meeting other parents, family and spouse for sure. But after, I think I have stayed in contact with multiple families I met next to the bays. We weren't in a room, so next to us, I stay in contact with several of those next door neighbors. We call them NICU neighbors, and to track our growth. And just, I'm like one of the moms that like just it welcomed me. So having that support and their acceptance of me as a mom to my son felt amazing. So I highly recommend the support lunches that they do offer if they have them. Um, I did use some of the Ronald McDonald rooms when I was there long days. I would get there from morning and stay just to get away and have lunch in separate areas just to have my quiet time. So I think having that support there too was nice just to step away. So that was helpful.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Even reframing, like you're not adopted a foster mom, you are the mom. So just reframing that for yourself and everyone around you is really important. And lastly, before is Myra, what kind of support, whether it be the NICU staff, family, community, anything that was helpful, most helpful during this time?
Yeah, I think my mom was a lifesaver. So, like I said, she uprooted herself to live in Virginia with us for Ava's 40-day NICU stay. And then for Mina, although it was just a week, right? I had my husband and two kids in Chicago. And so she was in Chicago at the time, helping take care of them. I will say the NICU staff plays such a huge role. There were definitely um, for Ava's stay, there were definitely those staff that you knew I can take more time away and like go take a breather or take a break because I know this person is there for her. And that made such a huge difference. So with Mina, I basically would just sat next to her little isolate for the week. And it was a very different NICU than Ava's NICU. And so there was not a lot of interaction with families. A lot of the babies were withdrawing. And so it felt very lonely that. And so it was after Mina that I found hand to hold and decided I'm going to be a peer mentor, right? So at least you have someone on the phone that knows what you've gone through and supports you. But the NICU is a hard experience.
Most definitely. And thanks everyone for sharing. So we've talked about your stories a little bit, and everyone had a little different transition to home experience, but we're just gonna kind of transition to like the post NICU. So Christy, like for you, how was the transition home for you and your baby? And did you feel the staff did a good enough job transitioning you from like discharge?
I think absolutely the hospital in that case stepped it up. We got a class and a full binder. They say babies don't come with books, but the NICU staff at St. David's in Austin gave us a big fat binder with like temperatures and everything and just all kind of things to take care of your NICU baby. It had all my appointments, it had all my reminders, it had like after hospital things. So then I just supplemented in there in that binder with like adoption requirements and meetings. So I feel like um, after we had a good transition out, figuring out how to take care of him, he did get placed with us in December, so it was flu season. So we were kind of NICU prepared there too, because we're like, no, RSV, you better have a flu shot. Thank God I didn't go through COVID time, because then I would have added one more worry on top of me. But having the rituals of washing your hands all the way up to your elbows and arms and sanitizing and stuff kind of prepared us for transitioning to home and taking extra caution with him as a preemie baby at home. So I think the hospital really helped with that information stuff and the rituals of the NICU.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. What about you, Myra?
Yeah, I think as Kirsty said, like the rituals of the NICU were so helpful, right? Because they let you get as involved as you want, I found with both of my girls. And so doing like every 3 hours diaper change in the bottle, like just getting into that routine so that you know, okay, when I'm leaving here, we're just gonna do that every 3 hours. Ava was under 4 pounds when we flew from Virginia to Chicago. It was terrifying. And so that Nikki definitely gave us a lot of assurances about like how to keep her safe and what to do. And we also got a binder. So things like that were really super helpful just to be prepared because, from a parent perspective, like the NICU, they've got all of these machines. So like, they're safe and taking those away was a transition. And so just having the NICU staff prepare us as much as they could was super helpful. And they were so accommodating to do that. So.
Thank you for sharing. And I know, Morgan, you have a little bit of a different experience, but just can you talk about your transition home and how the staff prepared you? You could also talk about your other daughter and maybe how that like impacted you because she still had a NICU stay, so there's still things that could have helped.
Yeah, so with Franklin, in foster care, it's a little different. I'm not sure state by state, but for in Ohio, we had to wait for court to happen to discharge. And it happened to be the one day it was a complete whiteout. And so we were all like trying to get court pushed sooner. And so it did not. So we were waiting in the NICU with him that day for discharge, just kind of hanging out. And he was off oxygen, off medications and everything. So we just got to like snuggle him up that day. We say we got to let him brace for the chaos of returning home to siblings who are very intense. And then court happened, which is when the county takes custody. And so once the county had custody, then we were able to leave. It's a little different. As adoptive parents, you are the ones taking custody until you finalize, and we had no legal rights, so we were just waiting on the county at that point. And then yeah, bringing him home. we went straight into therapies and appointments and all of the things. And for our daughter, it was very similar. She was there 30 days. They'd had to do the same kind of legal process to wait for her to get taken home. And then, yeah, she went to a foster home for 2 years before she transitioned to us. So just lots of transitions. I feel like once you get home, it's like you feel like you have kind of one, maybe like the tremors, or maybe something has finally calmed down, and then you feel like something else kind of maybe pops up developmentally. So I feel like there's been lots of little transitions since we got home that maybe we weren't expecting. Just new phases and new little things that he maybe is struggling with.
Absolutely. Okay, so Christy, I'll go to you first. What do you wish the NICU staff, and when I say NICU staff, we're gonna talk very broad range, doctors, nurses, social workers, perhaps case managers, respiratory therapists, it could even be the janitor. So what do you wish the NICU staff had understood better about the experience of adoptive or foster families?
I think our biggest thing was I wish they would have been a little bit more leeway with the last name entry because every time we would go in, it was like, what is your last name? What is the biological name, last name? And then what is the baby's name? At that time, he didn't have a name because he wasn't placed with us, so he was baby boy and their last name. So every time from the front entry, it's like, no, we can't put your last name. So our little stickers have the bio name, and they're like, wait, who are you again? Are you the biological because it has that last name? Is it your last name? And always a confusion, just always on his little display. It was always the biological last name. And it's like we're trying to feel attachment. And it's just those daily reminders that you're not the biological person. You're not supposed to be here. You're just an outsider. And it felt like an outsider at that point every time we would go in, from the first receptionist security to this next one, even at the little entry doors between sections. It's just like, wait, why is your last name? Show your ID. Why is your last name different from the sticker on your pet badge? Eventually, once you got to the NICU, because we were there so much, they knew us. So they would see me there for like 18 hours of the days on weekends and like 3, 4 hours. So they got to know me. And that helped. But I just wish they were more lenient in the system to where they could put last names side by side. It didn't matter. So that would be my wish.
Really good point. Really good point. Especially it makes you just feel even more isolated from your baby. I know it's safety precautions, but I don't know, maybe hospitals will think of a better way to do that. So what about you, Myra?
Yeah, it wasn't necessarily specific to being an adoptive parent, but there were definitely some NICU staff that, like, we were very focused on her milestones, right? With Ava in particular, because we knew when we first got there, we were told she was going to be there 8 weeks. So the idea of being like displaced from our home for 8 weeks was a lot. And so we were very focused on milestones, little ones, right? Like, when could she take that first bottle? When could she get out of the isolate? And the NICU that we were at, they moved them from one side of the wing to the other if they like graduated, right? They needed less care. And there were some NICU staff, nurses in particular, that they viewed it as like not as important as we did, not as seminal. So I remember one time we were bottle feeding Ava like the first 3 or 4 bottles. It was very early in the process, and she was having difficulty, right? As a very small preemie would. I mean, she was basically like a 28 weeker. And I remember the nurse saying to me, we'll probably have to put the tube back in. And I lost it. I was like, please don't say that, right? Like we're so focused on her meeting her milestones. And like I typically would not have like snapped, but I was like so emotional. I was like, please don't say that. And she ended up leaving the room and I felt bad about it, but it was like you have to understand how important it is, like how much emotion we're putting into the children making progress so that we can go home. And I feel like some very few, but a few staff members like just didn't realize the import of that, and they were not careful with their words, and it was like traumatic, dealing with all the other stuff that was going on.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Myra. What about you, Morgan?
I'd say overall we had a pretty positive experience with our NICU staff. the person that was holding him when I got there, like the very first day, was like immediately like, "This is your mom." Like it was so sweet. I will say we had a discharge doctor that was which used a very outdated term of drug baby, which you would never say. You would say baby born with exposures, and said like these babies never sleep. Like good luck with that. And so I think language and verbiage about our children is super important. Not only as they are tiny, but as they grow. It would be very offensive to especially a child that understands what you're talking about to use that terminology. So I think that's something super important for professionals to educate themselves on, just the language maybe around adoption, around foster care, the way they speak about a child, even if they don't understand yet.
Yeah, all really, really, really great points. We talked a lot about the staff and what they could do better, what they are doing well. I do want to just take a moment because I feel like it's necessary to just ask, like, if you had like we had a mom today that like is about to go into the NICU and maybe adopting, maybe fostering a baby. What like would you tell them? What advice would you give to them? I'll start with Myra.
Ooh, get ready. Um, yeah, I mean, just like get your support system ready, and I think it's kind of like be ready to roll with what the NICU throws at you because I feel like every day was kind of different and you get to know your staff and getting to them helps a ton, right? Them knowing who you are, them seeing your face, them understanding who you are, I think really helps that staff see you as not just another parent in the NICU, but like someone that they want to help and support, as opposed to just the baby being the patient, right? Because the baby is the patient, but obviously the family there matters. And making sure that everyone told me this when both girls were in the NICU, like take time for yourself. And I was like, no, but like you really have to. It's very emotional. And so even if it is 10 minutes where you're like, I'm gonna go sit in a room and just think about myself and right, like decompress, do it because you need it. It's a really taxing environment.
Absolutely. Christy?
While every experience is different, looking back on ours, I would say get ready to trust other people to take care of your baby, and that baby wants to thrive. Thankfully, most babies, they're fighting for their lives, and you have to trust the staff and your baby that they can handle this with whatever they bring. I know there was one day we walked in and there was like five doctors around our son, and we did not know what we just walked in. Maybe they hadn't gotten to call me, but they had realized his white blood cell count was super low, and they just told me that he's going to need a blood transfusion. And in my head, all I knew was like, no, like I was ready to fight them, but I don't know everything. I don't even know everything good or bad about a blood transfusion, but to me, that freaks me out. So I had to just be like, trust those doctors. So get ready to trust them, that they know what they're doing and they see several cases. I think taking time for yourself is absolutely one they had to remind me to do. On top of that is just remind yourself that this might be a small journey of your child's life. Thankfully, my son is like thriving and not having any complications from his 58 day stay, being a 28 weeker. Um, so just trust that this is a short time. You will get through this if you trust the right people to take care of your child.
Thank you for sharing. It's beautiful. And Morgan.
I would say obviously the support you have in the beginning is super important, but I would definitely try to find some adoptive or if you're a foster parent, long-term support. If you're especially if you're a foster parent, because Lord knows what your case is going to turn into. We thought ours was going to be very quick, and it was not. And so I think finding people that get it is super important long term as well. It's not a journey most people understand. So.
Yeah, thank you so much. And one question, really just a personal question that I want you to share with anyone watching, but just what it means to you to be a mom to a NICU baby, and your journey like in foster adoptive, whatever that looks like, just what it means to you today to be a NICU parent? Let's start with Myra this time.
That's a big question. I feel like it's like definitely shaped who we are, right? As parents for both girls, having to start out our parenthood for that child in the NICU. And I mean, just as a parent, like it's kind of like everything I am. Like it defines me to be a parent of these four children. And having that NICU experience really started that journey in a way I didn't expect, right? In a way that I think ultimately bonded me with the girls differently than it did with my other children that thankfully weren't in the NICU, but it was a much different experience. And especially when you have multiple children, right? It's different too with Sailor, who's our youngest. We were able to bring her home after 48 hours, and everybody, right, all the other kids are there on top of us. And it was a very different bonding experience than being in the NICU for 40 days with a little child that like needed you for every second and every little thing. So kind of defining of who we are as we continue our journey.
Yes, absolutely. What about you, Morgan?
I'll say with Franklin, he and I are like wild bonded. Even though we did not get that first month with him, and even his nurses will say like they have never seen such a turnaround from a baby that was struggling so severely, even like 24 hours prior, just having someone come in, it was like he knew it was me. I don't know. It was the most wild thing. He's still that way with me. Just yeah, and he is, I think, such just like a fighter. Like every single day I am just in awe of him, all the things he's continually overcoming. It's a million times harder for him than most kids his age. He's tiny, he's having issues with feeding and gross motor and he's just the happiest. Literally, we call him an emoji. He is like the biggest smile, the happiest personality. And I just think like you can tell almost that he like doesn't take it for life for granted. Somehow at 15 months old, that's like what his therapist said. Like he lives life in Technicolor. That's just it was the perfect explanation of him that she said that to me yesterday. I think we don't take life for granted because of him, just seeing especially all the exposures he had and what was in his system that kills grown adults. It's very scary to see all of those things in your child's system on their chart and just that he is like thriving and conquering the world. I just think it's given us a huge appreciation that he's here. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Living life in Technicolor. I love that. That's such an awesome phrase. Christine.
So I think being a NICU mom just helped me bond with my son in a way that I didn't expect. Having him on my test and letting him learn my heartbeat just made me bond with him incredibly. Just so close. Him and I are, like the other mom said, are so close. I think he's closer to me than our second adoptive child, who did not need a NICU stay. And I just was like, can I do skin to skin with her, please? Because she needed that extra loving nature. She's a tiger. But my son is just this sweet boy who like adores me. And I think the NICU really gave that perspective of seeing how fragile he is and him needing me so much. And my husband, we would fight to like, who gets to hold him today? Who gets to hold him for 4 hours? So being there and being able to bond with him, I think the NICU did that for us. It did mess me up a little bit for my next child because I'm like, we don't need to do all this other stuff and this extra stuff. She came home in 2 days after, and so I was like, wait, I need to do all this NICU stuff, and I kept asking the doctors, they're like, no, you don't need to do any of that. She's completely fine. So kind of messed me up for her. And then I guess most NICU parents want to treat their child like he's fragile, but my son, thankfully, is thriving so good that I like to tell people he's awesome size now. Like you would never know. I was like, he was 3 pounds in 58 days, and they're like, he's almost as tall as you. He goes to my chin, and so I think I didn't let that experience let me treat him like a NICU baby. I let him grow and fight like he was in the hospital. He would slap nurses when they would try to like give him shots. So he was a fighter, and I'm letting him be the fighter that he is, that he came out of there from the NICU. But definitely the bonding experience is what I took out of the NICU. Like I have such a stronger relationship with my son. And I kind of want that with my daughter. You didn't let me hold you for 4 to 8 hours a day. You weren't fragile and you didn't need that like your brother. But it's just wonderful to remember and think about how much love we got to give him when he needed it the most.
Thank you all so much for sharing. Everyone's journey looks a little bit different, but I appreciate you all for sharing. So before we wrap up, we want to give just a huge thank you for sharing your stories and experiences. These parents, these moms' journeys highlight the challenges and triumphs of adopted and foster parents in the NICU, as well as the power of support along the way, before, during, and way long after the NICU. So we appreciate each of you for joining us and being part of this important conversation. Your commitment to understanding and supporting NICU families makes a lasting impact. So for NICU professionals watching, we'd love to hear your thoughts. I think there's going to be a QR code up here. There it is. There it is. Okay, so there's your QR code. If you scan the QR code and complete the survey, your feedback continues to help us improve and give you more meaningful conversations like this one. So thank you all so much for being here. I appreciate it.